Inshallah, today we'll start a new unit and a new lesson. Unit 2 is talking about the cell theory, and chapter 1 is talking about the discovery of the cell and the cell theory. We will talk about how the scientists discovered the cell. It takes very long time to discover the cell and the structure of the cell. And we know that the cell needs very small, so it needs special tools or devices to be watched, to focus on it and to watch it. You need a device called microscope to watch the cell. You cannot watch the cell by your naked eyes. You need some devices or some tools to watch the cell and to recognize the cell and to know the structure of the cell. But in the beginning, before we study how the scientists discover the cell, who are the scientists discover the cell, and what are the steps made by these scientists to discover the cell and to discover also the microscope, we have to remember in the beginning that the body is made up of many systems. If you remember, the body is made up of many systems. The body of living organisms, like human, for example, the body is made up of many systems. We know that our body is made up of many systems. Like what systems? Digestive system, respiratory system, reproductive system, nervous system, respiratory system, a lot of circulatory system, a lot of systems in our body. And all of these systems work together in a highly coordination. That systems of the body work together in highly coordination to maintain the life. So your body is made up of many systems, and these systems work together to maintain the life, to survive, to help you survive and continue your life. Welcome, Ya Yusuf. You are so late.
Sorry, Mister.
معلش. We just start talking about the cell theory and the cell discovery. Okay. Before we start talking about the cell, we know that cell is the smallest and the finest building unit of the living organism's body. But if we are talking about the body of the living organism, we have to know the body is made up of many levels. Many levels. If we start by the body, for example, the biggest level is the body itself. The biggest level is the body. We can here make some levels of your body. The biggest body level is the biggest body level here is the system. The biggest unit of the body is the system. Your body is made of many systems. Okay, this is the biggest building unit. The body is made of many systems, like respiratory system, digestive system, nervous system, circulatory system, and so on. And every system is made up also of smaller units. These smaller units are called who knows? Every system is made up of yes, organs. Very good. The system is made up of many organs. And every organ also is made up of smaller units. The smaller units of the organ, like we are talking about the digestive system, for example, it's made up of many organs like the stomach, the mouth, the esophagus, the large intestine, the small intestine, and so on. And every organ also is made up of smaller units. What are the units making the organ? They are the tissues. They are the tissues. Remember, the organ is made up of many tissues. Okay, and your body is made up of organs and tissues. Okay, and if we go further, the smaller than tissue, the tissue is made up of smaller units. These units are called finally we reach the cell. Finally, the tissue is made up of cells. So the cells are the smallest building units, the smallest building units of the body, and the levels of the body start from the body itself. The body, and the body is made up of many systems. and every system is made up of many organs, and every organ is made up of many tissues, and finally the tissues are made up of cells. So the cell, finally we reach that the cell is the smallest and the finest, the fundamental building unit of the body. Okay, so our bodies are made up of cells. So the cell is only the building unit, or it is also the function unit? The cell is also the function unit, because the cell builds the body and process all vital activities. The vital activities occur in the cells, like respiration, for example. Respiration occurs in the cell, in a part of the cell, or is called a mitochondria. Photosynthesis, for example, photosynthesis process occur in the cell, in a part of the cell called a chloroplasts or green blasts. So we have here, the cell is not only the building unit, but is also the cell is the function unit. The cell is not only the building unit, but also the function unit. You ask me, give reason. Cell is not only the building unit, but it is also the function unit. But it is also the function unit. So we will say what? The function unit. Your answer will be what? The answer will be, because all vital processes needed for the life occur in the cell. Because all vital processes, like respiration, excretion, and so on, occur in the cell. Okay, and digestion also, all vital processes needed for the life occur in the cell. So you have to know the levels, the body levels, and you have to know in the beginning that the cell is not only the building unit, but also the function unit. All function units, vital processes occur in the cell. Is it okay? Okay. So now we are going to study the discovery of the cell. How did the scientists discover the cell? And what are the examples of the cell? Before the discovery of the cell, we have to know the size of the cell. It differs from small, very small cells to very large cells. Not all the cells have the same size, but some cells are very small and some cells are very large. For example, some cells are very small, like bacteria cell. Bacteria cell is very, very small. The smallest living cell is a bacteria cell. But we have some cells in our body. Different cells, according to their function, they have different shape. They have different structure. They have different size. So let's talk a little bit about some examples of cells in our body. This cell, for example, is called neuron or the nerve cell. This cell is called neuron or the nerve cell. This is the building unit of what system? Who can tell me? The neuron or the nerve cell is a building unit of what system? Can you tell me, Yusuf? The neuron or the nerve cell is a building unit of what system? Digestive system, respiratory system, or nervous system?
Nervous system.
Of course, very good. Nervous system. So the nervous system is made up of millions of neurons, millions of neurons. And you have to know that the neuron has special characteristics. It is different from any other cell because it has no ability to reproduce or to divide. يعني ايه الكلام ده؟ The neuron cell cannot divide. Okay, so this cell is very special because it has no ability to divide. Okay, and also the red blood cells has no ability to divide. But the neuron, you know, the neuron is one of the amazing cells in the body. The neuron or the nerve cell builds the brain. It's this part of the neuron is divided into two parts: the head or the body of the cell, and the other part is the axon. So the cell is made up of two parts. You can divide it into two parts. This part number one, and this is part number two. Part number one is called what? Is called the cell body. The cell body. Okay, and the other part is called the axon. The axon, and the axon is very long. The cell body is found where, and the axon is found where? The cell body is found in the central nervous system. يعني the cell body found in the brain. Found in the brain. Your brain has millions of cell body, neuron cell body. And the axon extends a long distance. Extends through what? Extends through the nerves. Extends through the nerves. So there is a nerve from your brain reaches your toe, your finger in the feet. This the axon will be how long? It will be maybe 1 meter or 1.5 meters. So the axon of the cell is very long. So we can consider the nerve cell is the longest cell in the body. It may reach 1 meter or more length. It may reach 1 meter or more in length, because the axon extends in the nerve and reach all body organs. But the cell body is found in the brain, in the central nervous system. Okay, and this cell is characterized by it has no ability to divide. The neurons are long and able to send messages to the spinal cord, and they send the electrical message, which is through the spinal cord, which found in the vertebral column. The spinal cord and the brain are the central nervous system, and they send the messages through the nerves to all body parts. These messages are electrical messages, and this is a function of the neuron, sending messages between the brain and all body parts and vice versa. So you can consider the neuron or the nerve cell is the longest cell in the body. We can move to another cell, like the muscle cell, the muscular cell, or the muscle cell. Your muscles found everywhere in your body. Your muscle fibers, your muscle in the hand, your muscle in the leg, your muscle in the neck, your muscle in the back, your muscles in the chest, your muscle in the heart. You have a lot of muscles in your body. And the muscular tissue made up of muscle cell. The muscular cell made the muscular tissue in your body. And this tissue has a special ability to move, to make something not other cell cannot make. No other cell can make. It is the contraction and relaxation. The muscular cell has the ability to contract and relax, so it can make a movement. It can make the movement. So if we have a muscle, the muscle is fibers, the muscle is made of muscle fibers, and the muscle fibers are made of muscular cells. The muscular cell is the building unit of muscular tissue. The muscular tissue is the building of the muscles in your body. The muscle cell is long cell, which is cylinder shape, has a cylinder shape, which forms the muscle tissue. And they have the ability to contract and relax. Why they have the ability to contract and relax? Of course, to make the movement, to able to be moved, to be able to move. And the muscular tissue has special ability, which is it can contract and relax and make the movement. This is another example of the cell in your body. Another example of the cell in your body. Let's move to another cell. We can talk about a lot of cells in the after some lessons. We can talk about many cells and many tissues. After we talk about the cell theory and the cell discovery. The cell theory and the cell discovery. We can go here to classify the living organisms into two types. We can classify the living organisms according to the type and the number of the cells, and the structure of their body, we can divide the living organisms into two types. What are these two types? We have the first type, the living organism which is made of one cell only. We call it unicellular organism. Unicellular organism. Okay? And these living organisms, the body of these living organisms are made of a one cell only. Like bacteria, for example, like amoeba, like paramecium. These living organisms, their body is made of one cell only, so they are very, very small in size. They are microscopical organisms. They are microscopical organisms. And the cell can perform, this cell, one cell only, can perform all vital activities needed for the continuity of the life. So the cell can make all biological functions and all vital processes for the life, like respiration, digestion, excretion, reproduction, and so on. These living organisms are very small, microscopical, and we call them another name. We call them microorganisms. Microorganisms or unicellular organisms. Okay? And the other type of living organisms, the other type or the other group of living organisms, which is their body is made up many cells, big number of cells, the other type is called multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms, their body is made up of many cells, which differentiated and specialized in their function. Some cells make the function of respiration. Some cells make the function of reproduction. Some cells make the function of excretion, and so on. From the examples of multicellular organisms, man, whale, tree, dog, a dolphin, and so on. So we can divide living organisms into two types or two groups according to the structure of their body into unicellular organisms and the multicellular organisms. Type. We know that the characteristics of life. We have to know that there is some common characteristics of the life of living organisms. Yani, there is some core characteristics. If you see these characteristics in anything, any living organism, you can say this is a living organism. If these characteristics are absent, you are talking about a non-living thing. So what are the characteristics of life? What is the difference between human and the chair? The human makes some characteristics characterized by some processes. He makes some characteristics like feeding, transporting, respiration, excretion, motion, and so on. This is the characteristics of life. Okay, and the cell is the smallest or tiniest fundamental building unit of the living organism, and it is capable for carrying all vital functions of the life. So the cell is not only the building unit, but the cell also is a function unit because it carry out all functions for life. And we have here some properties of the cells. The cells are varied in shape, structure, and size, as we see in the last page. We see some cells are very long, like the nervous cell, and some cells have a different shape, like the muscular cell, and so on. And you know that the biggest cell and the smallest cell is the bacterial cell. It is the smallest cell in size, and the biggest cell in size until now we discover only the biggest cell discovered is what? The biggest cell discovered is the cell of the ostrich, the egg of the ostrich. The egg of the ostrich is the biggest cell discovered until now. The egg of the ostrich is the biggest cell discovered until now. Okay, the biggest cell, the fertilized, the unfertilized egg of the ostrich. This is the biggest cell known ever in all living organisms. Okay? If you saw the egg of the ostrich, you can see it is maybe 1 or 2 kilo. If you hold the egg of ostrich in your hand, it may be 2 kilograms. Okay? So the cell inside it is very, very big. Also, there is a relationship between the shape and the function of the cell. There is a relationship between the shape and the size and the function of the cell. For example, as we said before, the neuron or the nerve cell is the smallest cell. It reaches one or more meter. Why? I'll give reason. To be able to transfer the messages from the spinal cord that present inside the vertebral column to farthest part of the body, to all body parts, like the two in your finger, the two in your foot. So the nerve cell is very long. The beginning of the cell body in your head or in your spinal cord, in your brain or your spinal cord, and the end of the cell reaches the toe or the finger. So it is very long, maybe 1 meter or more in length. And the muscular cells also are cylindrical and long, and they have the ability to contract and relax and to make a movement, to make the movement. So many cells have different shape, different function. According to that, they have a different structure. We look at these pictures. We have some different cells here. The smallest cell here, which is bacteria cell. And here we have the red blood cell, which has no nucleus. It is specialized by having no nucleus. We have here the plant cell, and we have the muscular cell, and we have here the shape of the nerve cell or neuron. Can you see there is big difference in the shape? There is big difference in the shape and also in the size. And here we have the unfertilized egg. So cells have different shapes, different size according to their function. Different shape, different size according to their function. Discovering the cell. Who discovered the cell? It is not only one scientist, but many scientists. Many scientists help to discover the cell, and this come year after year, not in 1 year, but in many years. Well, let's start talking about scientists one after one. The first one is called Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was a British scientist. He is a favor of a discovery of the cell. You can say the discovery of the cell by who? You can say by Robert Hooke. Why? Why Robert Hooke is considered the one who discovered the cell? Because in the year of 1665, from maybe 400 years ago, he make a small microscope, a simple microscope. He make a simple microscope and examine a piece of cork tissue. Examine a piece of cork tissue. You know the cork tissue, which covers the stem of some trees. The tree is covered with the cork. Okay. بيسموه قلف الشجر. الغلاف الذي يغطي ساق الشجرة. The cork tissue. Okay. It is composed of small boxes. He discovered by the microscope. Discover what? The cell is made of small boxes, and these small boxes like the cavity, or like for example, it is like the cells made by the bees, the honeybee. The honeybee makes some hexagonal shape cells, and he discovered that the tissue of the cork made up of many cells like this. It is like the shape of the honeybee cells, and he said this vacuole or a cell come from the word cellula, which means an empty room or a small room. He used the word cell It comes from the Latin word cellula, okay, which means a small room, a small room. So he gave it this name. Each box, call it a cell, come from the word cellula from the Latin language. Okay, it is like the word cavity or a hole or a small room. Okay, after that, another scientist called Van Leeuwenhoek. Van Leeuwenhoek. So Robert Hooke is the discoverer of the cell, especially the plant cell. But Van Leeuwenhoek start discovery the animal cell. The first one who discovered the animal cell. He observed by a stronger microscope, better than, of course, the microscope made by Robert Hooke, because he come after him by maybe 10 years, and they make a stronger microscope. But also it is a simple microscope. Okay. He is the first one who observed the organisms, the animals, the microorganisms by his microscope. Using this microscope in the year of 1674 to magnify objects up to 100 times. It is better than, of course, the microscope made by Robert Hooke. And he examined what? Different substances. The bond water, for example. And he observed the amazing world in the bond water. If you take a drop of bond water, لو خدت قطرة من ماء البركة and look under the microscope, you can observe an amazing world. You can observe an amazing world under the microscope. And the first one who made this was Van Leeuwenhoek. Van Leeuwenhoek. The first one who saw the world of the microorganisms. After Van Leeuwenhoek, there is another scientist. After maybe 200 years, the science developed more and more. In the year of 1838, he studied the plant cells, and he said that the plant is made up of cells. The plants are made up of cells, composed of cells. And he stated this depending on his own researches and the previous research of the previous scientists. So Schleiden, he states that the plant cell is the building unit of any plant. The plant cell is the building unit of any plant. After that, another scientist called Schwann or Schwann. He is from Germany, so you can say Schwann. If you study Germany, W is pronunciated V. Schwann decided that also all living organisms composed of the cells. This is in the year 1893. Okay, after maybe 50 years or 60 years after Schleiden. So Schleiden he stated that the plant is made up of cells, and Schwann states that the animal also and all living organisms are made up of cells. After that, come another scientist called Virchow in the year of 1855. He say that the cell is the function and the building unit. So you can say that Virchow, one of the scientists who state the cell is a building and function unit, and this is a new discovery. It was a new discovery. And he say also the new cells are produced only from pre-existing ones, pre-existing cells. From where the cells come? The cell comes from division of another cell. So any cell is found now come from a pre-existing one. So Virchow is also the one who made the cell theory. So the cell theory now is talking about what? What from the previous study of the scientists, we can say that the cell theory. Finally, we can collect the work of these scientists together to put the cell theory, to state the principles of the cell theory. There is three principles, three basic principles from collecting the information from the scientists who discover the cell, we have three principles, which are known as the cell theory. Principle number one, he says that all living organisms are made up of cells, which may be single or grouped in clusters. So any living organism, although it is unicellular organism or multicellular organism, its body is made of cells. Okay? Although it is single in the unicellular, or it is clusters like in the multicellular organism. This is the principle number one. All living organisms are made up of cells. The principle number two, cells are the basic functional units of the living organisms. Cells, not only the building, but also the function unit. And this state by Virtue. You remember, Virtue say that the cell is not only the building unit, but also it is a function unit. And finally, the third principle, which is all cells come only from other pre-existing living cells. Not say, no any cells come from nothing. The cell comes from another cell. The cell comes from another cell. Here we can see a video about the cell theory. This is maybe the Leeuwenhoek microscope. It's a very old and very primitive. Can you see? Before we go to the development of the microscope, we want to see the video about the discovery of the cell and the cell theory.
أو
Do you have a question, نعمة?
لا بس ما كانش في صوت ففكرت اتقطع عني.
معلش. We'll see now a video, okay? We'll see a video about the cell theory, okay?
Important. Most people don't know that this theory is one of the most historic, scientific, universally accepted concepts, and it essentially talks about how that living organisms on this planet are made up of cells, and scientists were able to discover these cells using very early microscopes. Now, I asked a student one time to describe the cell theory, and he started talking about cell phones. So I have to let you guys know, unfortunately, the cell theory has absolutely, positively nothing to do with cell phones. All right, let's get to it. A lot of good stuff to talk about. Hope you enjoy. Now, a lot of students ask, why is it important we learn about the cell theory? Now, it's not only one of the most significant scientific discoveries ever. We're talking about the discovery of the cell. But it also represented a major evolution in microscopes, microscope technology that allowed scientists to really visualize what they were hypothesizing in a laboratory. Now that they could actually see cells, they could prove that they existed. Now, these cells helped define the characteristics of life, but they did much more. They laid the groundwork for much of modern biology that you learn today in class and in labs. Those include microbiology and cell biology, as well as looking about common ancestry. Now, common ancestry is a field that we still are analyzing today, and there's a lot of companies that look at common ancestry, like 23andMe, that you may know of. It also contributed to the study of physiology and human disease. Now, the cell theory actually dates back to the 17th century with Robert Hooke. He was a man who worked for the Royal Society in England, and he was a very prominent member of the Royal Society. There was not too many pictures of him, but here's a really nice one we found by Rita Greer, painted in 2004. Now, as a member of the Royal Society, he was a philosopher, but he also did science experiments. And at the time, no one knew about cells. So he was actually the first one to discover cells, and he did so by using a very old-fashioned microscope that could only magnify up to 30 times magnification. And he analyzed oak tree bark and found that the oak tree bark had these little tiny compartments that he coined as cells. and the cell means small room. And he couldn't see inside these cells. He didn't know if they were alive, but he was the first one to discover that they existed. Now, shortly after Hooke published his results, a man by the name of Anton Von Luenhook, and I know I'm butchering that name completely, I sincerely apologize, but he was much more skilled at building microscopes, and he was actually able to build one with 300 times the magnification, which impressed the hell out of everyone. He took protozoa and bacteria, which he didn't know were protozoa and bacteria at the time, but he named them animalcules, and he was able to see that they were modal. And he reported to the Royal Society in the 1600s that because these were modal organisms, and that represented a quality of life, that these specimens were living organisms. He's also credited for making the first observations of human red blood cells, and very importantly, sperm cells, because he was able to observe that sperm and egg were fusing together to create a new generation of cells. This was extremely important because it was the first evidence against spontaneous generation, that cells were not just arising out of nowhere, that they were coming from pre-existing cells that we know to be true today. Now, following the work of Hooke and Luenhook, who were the ones who really solidified that cells existed, the cell theory didn't really come into existence, the theory itself, until the mid-1800s. So scientists at the time were recognizing that cells existed, but the theory about what these cells represented and what they stood for in terms of life was just beginning to surface. So finally, in the mid-1800s, 3 German men by the name of Theodor Schwann, Matthias Jacob Schneid, and Rudolf Virchow, and I know if I'm butchering those names, again, I apologize, but these 3 men were finally able to come together with a large enough body of work and put together a concept known as the cell theory, which is actually a group of concepts we'll go into right now. But they are the ones who are credited for the cell theory, building upon the work of previous scientists like Hooke and Luenhook. All right, let's bring in the drum roll. Now, the cell theory is: number 1, all living organisms are composed of 1 or more cells. Number 2, the cell is the most basic unit of life. And number 3, all cells arise only from pre-existing cells. Now, my question for you guys is, which one of these components of the cell theory was the most controversial at the time? And the answer to that is number 3, that all cells arise only from pre-existing cells. And the reason that was so controversial is that it went against a very widely held belief that cells arose spontaneously. And it was also very difficult to prove. And it wasn't until experiments.
Okay, this is the cell theory, ya shabab. Who can read it? Neema, can you read it? Can you repeat it again? Yeah.
All living organisms are compounds of 1 or more cells.
Yes.
Number 2, the cell is the most basic unit of life.
And you remember, not only the unit of building, remember, not only the unit of building, but also the function unit. Not only the building unit, but also the function unit, okay?
Okay.
Continue.
Number 3, all cells arise only from
pre-existing cells. All cells arise only from pre-existing cells. Is it okay, Shabab? In the next session, inshallah, we'll talk together about the development of the microscope and the types of the microscopes and the idea of the microscope, how the microscope works, and the image formed by the microscope. This in the next session, inshallah. Until now, this is a photo for the strongest microscope in the world. This microscope is called the electronic microscope. We have 2 types of the electronic microscope: scanning electronic microscope and the transmission electronic microscope. This we'll talk about it inshallah in the next session in details. And this microscope found in every school, you can see in your school, and you can buy it from some shops. This microscope is called the light microscope. You can use one at home, and you can use it to study the small cells or the blood cells and so on. Inshallah, we'll continue next session.